By the time you sat down to watch this, your brain had already used up its best thinking for the day. Not most of it, the best of it. Every decision you make from here is being handled by a brain that's quietly cutting corners. And it started doing that hours ago without telling you. Most people assume that decision-making is steady, that the brain you have at 9 a.m. is the same brain you have at 3 p.m., that if you're not tired, not drunk, not distracted, your judgment is basically intact. That assumption is wrong, and the consequences of it being wrong are quietly running through every part of your life. Here's what's actually happening inside your head. In 2011, a team of researchers in Israel published a study that nobody expected to produce. They were analyzing parole board decisions. 8 judges, over 1,100 cases reviewed across a single day. Each prisoner came before the board with their file, their record, their lawyer. The judges deliberated. They voted. And the researchers recorded every single outcome. What they found had nothing to do with the crime, nothing to do with the sentence length, nothing to do with the quality of the legal representation. The single strongest predictor of whether a prisoner was granted parole was the time of day their case was heard. Prisoners reviewed at the start of the day were granted parole about 65% of the time. Prisoners reviewed at the end of a session, just before a break, were granted parole less than 10% of the time. The same judge, the same legal standard, the same stated commitment to fairness. A completely different outcome based on nothing except how many decisions had come before. That's not a quirk, that's a pattern, and it has a name. Psychologist Roy Baumeister called it ego depletion. The idea is straightforward, but the implications are not. Your brain's capacity for careful, deliberate thinking is not unlimited. Every time you make a decision, resist an impulse, weigh a consequence, or force yourself to concentrate, you are spending from a finite mental resource. And when that resource runs low, your brain doesn't shut down. It does something more dangerous. It defaults. Think about what defaulting actually means. When your decision-making fuel runs out, your brain doesn't stop making decisions. It just starts making them faster, with less information, and with a strong bias toward whatever is easiest. Approve everything. Deny everything. Pick the familiar option. Pick no option at all. The specific default doesn't matter. What matters is that you're no longer actually deciding. You're pattern matching on fumes. And here's what nobody tells you. This isn't a flaw that some people have and others don't. This is the architecture. Every human brain on Earth runs this way. The judges in that Israeli study weren't careless or corrupt. They were just human brains doing exactly what human brains do when the resource runs low. But it gets stranger. Because ego depletion doesn't just change the quality of your decisions, it changes what feels true to you. In 2008, researchers at Florida State University ran a series of experiments on self-control and perception. They found that when people were mentally depleted, they didn't just make worse choices. They started rating the same situations differently. Problems that would have seemed manageable in the morning felt overwhelming in the afternoon. Risks that would have felt acceptable earlier in the day felt catastrophic later. Opportunities that would have seemed exciting at 9 a.m. felt not worth the effort by 4 p.m. Your depleted brain doesn't just decide differently, it sees differently. The world it shows you in the afternoon is literally not the same world it showed you in the morning, and you have no way of knowing which version is closer to the truth, because from inside the brain, both feel identical. This is where it gets personal. Think about when the most important conversations in your life happen. The argument with your partner that started when one of you got home from work. The career decision you finally committed to after a long day of back-to-back meetings. The financial choice you made late at night when you were tired of thinking about it. The apology you kept meaning to give but somehow never found the right words for until it was too late. Now think about what your brain was running on during each of those moments. There's a reason Barack Obama, when asked why he only wore gray or blue suits, said he was trying to eliminate decisions. He said he had too many other decisions to make, and he didn't want to waste his mental energy on what he was wearing. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day. Mark Zuckerberg has publicly said the same thing. These are not people who couldn't afford variety. These are people who understood at a practical level that every trivial decision costs the same currency as an important one, and the budget is fixed. Here's where the science gets uncomfortable, because ego depletion research has a complication. In 2010, a psychologist named Carol Dweck proposed something that seemed to contradict Baumeister's work entirely. Her experiments suggested that mental depletion only happened to people who believed it would. People who didn't believe their willpower was a limited resource showed significantly less depletion over time. Her conclusion was that ego depletion might be partly a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe your brain runs out, it runs out faster. The scientific community has been arguing about this ever since. But the most honest reading of the evidence doesn't actually put Baumeister and Dweck in opposition. It puts them in sequence. The depletion is real. The rate at which it happens is influenced by your beliefs about it. Both things can be true at the same time. What this means practically is that the story you tell yourself about your own mental capacity changes your mental capacity. A brain that expects to stay sharp stays sharper longer. A brain that expects to give out by noon gives out by noon. Not because willpower is infinite, but because the budget is more flexible than anyone thought, and your beliefs are part of the accounting. There's one more layer to this, and it might be the most useful thing in the video. In 2007, a psychologist named Shay Danziger was part of a different study looking at glucose and decision-making. He found that the depletion effect tracked almost perfectly with blood sugar. Judges who had just eaten made significantly more favorable rulings than judges who hadn't. A snack break didn't just restore their energy. It measurably restored the quality of their judgment. The Israeli Parole Board was more likely to grant freedom right after breakfast and right after lunch. The rest of the time, the default answer was no. Your brain is not a mind floating above a body. It is a physical organ running on physical fuel. When the fuel drops, the quality of your thinking drops with it. Not gradually, not proportionally, suddenly, and without warning you. So here's what this actually means for you. You are walking through your life making your most consequential decisions during the hours when your brain is least equipped to make them. Not because you're stupid or weak or undisciplined, but because nobody told you that decision-making has a daily budget, that the budget starts spending the moment you wake up, and that by the time most of the day's hard choices arrive, the account is already running low. Every human brain does this. The judges do it. The executives do it. The people who built systems to try to protect against it still do it. The difference isn't whether your brain depletes, it's whether you know it does. The most important decision of your day probably isn't waiting for you in some dramatic moment of crisis. It's sitting quietly in the first 2 hours of your morning when your brain is fresh and the default settings haven't kicked in yet. That's when the real you is making choices. The rest of the day, you're mostly just living with them, and you've been doing it your whole life without knowing that was the window. Now you do.